started here by adding the water, the rainwater, to my big, huge pot. Ooh, it's so hot out today, the rainwater is warm. Ugh. There we go. Added. Now, in the smaller pot, I'm going to be adding my onion skins. And in the larger pot, I am going to add a little bit of dish soap, my fabric, and my yarn. To get started with those, I need to heat them up to just below a simmer. We don't really want any recurring bubbles, just a few scattered bubbles here and there, nice and hot. And that's going to kind of liquefy the oils that are inside the wool and inside the cotton. The wool is going to be finished first, but the cotton is going to require a little bit more time and a little bit more of a vigorous boil, but we can get them started together. So, wool and fabric into the water. Also, this is the point at which I'm adding just a little bit of dish soap. That's going to help remove the lanolin from the wool, which is the oil from the sheep's skin. It's not going to have much of an effect on the cotton, but again, we're prepping the wool as well as the cotton in the same pot, so a little bit of dish soap goes a long way. First of all, don't overdo it. And I'm going to have it on medium-high until it gets to the temperature I like, and then I'll back it down to low. I'm going to leave the wool and the fabric in there for 30 minutes to an hour, and then I'll come back and get ready to rinse out the soap. For the onion dye bath, which is the other pot, I'm going to add those onion skins, and same thing. I'm going to turn the heat up to about a medium-high until we get to a simmer. Then I'm going to back it down to low and just keep it nice and hot for the same amount of time, 30 minutes to an hour. I'll show you what it's looking like now, and then we'll check back after the time has elapsed, and I'll show you what it's looking like. Okay friends, it's been, well, I have to be honest, it's definitely been more than an hour. So it's been about 2.5 hours rather than 1 hour. Again, I'm not concerned, don't worry about it. Now it's time for us to wash out the yarn. We have to get all of that dish soap and any of the lanolin that's kind of liquefied, we need to rinse it out. After that, it's going to be time to pre-mordant the wool, which means we're going to be mixing about 2 tablespoons of aluminum sulfite, alum powder, into a big pot of water, and I'm gonna let that sit at a hot heat, but again, just below a simmer for, guess what, another hour. The cotton fabric, what I'm going to do with that is after the wool is finished pre-mordanting, I'm going to have water boiling, and the cotton is going to go into the boiling water, and that's going to loosen it up. At that point, I'm going to add the washing soda. Is that not the prettiest orange? It's so dark, it's so vibrant. I'm really looking forward to getting it on some yarn. If you see on the yarn that's still in the pot, there were a few onion flakes that made it into that pot, and they're already stained yellow. So I'm excited, but it's first time to wash out the yarn. So I'm gonna go over to the sink, grab the yarn, I'm gonna put my gloves on for heat protection this time, and I'm gonna rinse it out. I'm gonna use warm water to not shock the yarn too much, and then I'm going to refill my pot with rainwater again, because I have rainwater, and then I'm gonna bring it up to another simmer, and I'll show you when it's time to add the aluminum sulfate. This time, I'm only gonna be filling up the pot about halfway with water. And I'm just going to put the yarn back in. Ooh, it's so squishy. I'm gonna put it back on the stove. All right, so the yarn is now in the pot. I'm going to add my 2 tablespoons of alum powder. Just gonna sprinkle it in. I'm gonna let the dye bath with the onion peels sit for another hour or so while the yarn gets itself ready. The other thing I'm gonna do is leave the cotton bed sheet, the cotton pillowcase. I'm just going to leave that in the sink in a container with the hot water that I poured out. It'll keep it nice and hot so that when the yarn is ready to go in the dye bath, the cotton can get pre-mordanted. So this is the portion of the tutorial where The pre-mordant is getting the fiber ready to accept and chemically bond to the pigments that are in the onion skin. Whew, it is warm here today. It is like 30 degrees Celsius. I don't know, like in the 80s anyway, maybe the 90s. It's hot. I'll see you in another hour. Nothing to see in this time because the yarn is in clear water. The alum dissolves pretty much instantly and it's still clear. So that's gonna sit at a low simmer, same with the dye bath, and I will show you what it's looking like when we are ready for the next step. Okay friends, so it's been some time. The wool is ready to be rinsed and it's ready to go into the dye bath. First, we are going to have to strain out all of the pieces of onion from the dye bath and we have to rinse the yarn, but after that, it's pretty much gonna be set it and forget it overnight. We're gonna leave the yarn in the dye bath overnight. We're gonna turn the heat off, let it all cool down together, and it's gonna be really cool in the morning. It's gonna blow your mind. But first, we have to take the yarn out of the hot water that has the aluminum sulfite in it, and we need to give it a good rinse. At this point, again, I recommend wearing gloves. You would be surprised what a little layer of rubber will protect you from. Okay, also, now that the yarn is finished pre-mordanting and we're rinsing it out, there's room in the pot again for the pillowcase. So I'm gonna put this 100% cotton pillowcase that was heated up and washed and it's ready to be mordanted. So it's gonna go back in that water. It does have aluminum sulfate in it, but it's not going to cause any issue with this cotton. And I'm gonna add a little bit of washing soda. When I say a little bit, I mean a little bit, like 1 or 2 tablespoons, nothing too crazy. Then I'm going to cover that pot with the pillowcase in it, and I'm going to bring it up to a boil. Actually, a boil. You can have it boiling, a rolling boil is okay. And we're going to want it to be pretty hot, minimum a good simmer, maximum a pretty hearty boil for about 30 minutes. That's going to really penetrate the pillowcase and get it ready for the dye bath, which is what we want because we want both of them to be sitting overnight. Let me wash this yarn. This next part, this is kind of where the fun is going to happen. What I'm going to be using as my dye bath station is going to be just a plastic tub. You can use whatever you've got on hand. A Rubbermaid tote is fine. If you leave it in the pot, that's fine too. I just like to see what I'm working with. And my strainer is missing in action, so I'm going to use this little container with holes in it. And this is when we're going to be using the cheesecloth. So get yourself a little square of cheesecloth. I'm going to say it's probably about half a yard. Anyway, about half a meter, half a yard of cheesecloth. And what I'm going to do with that is I am just going to place it just 2 layers thick. Again, you can use like a tea towel, you could use an old t-shirt, it doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to layer it like that, right into that plastic container. I'm going to do it off towards the edge because this is going to end up sinking in and we don't want to dye that, we just want to dye the yarn. So now I'm going to get my dye pot and I'm going to pour the contents of the dye pot into here. The liquid will pass through and the solid onion bits will remain inside. So let's do that now while this yarn just does a little drip dry. I'm going to take my measuring cup and I'm just going to start to take scoops. You're going to see how beautiful, let's just show it first, how dark that orange is. Oh, it's so pretty. It will come out yellow, but it looks orange right now, which is fun. And the great thing about this is you can still compost those peels. Nothing's wrong with them. They can still go right into the compost. Ooh, look at that color. Then you can pull your onions out of there, that container out. You're gonna squeeze the remaining liquid out. Remember it's hot though, like be careful. Probably still wear gloves. Ow! And there we go. Now, I am going to put this beautiful yarn in there. Look at this. Just one dip and look at how saturated that is. And this is gonna sit in here all night long. Ooh. Oh, I just love it. Look at that beautiful color. Ooh, this is gonna be so pretty. All right, so I'm just gonna let it sit in there overnight without bothering it. It doesn't need to be bothered. And you're gonna see tomorrow the most magical color in the entire world. Although, to be honest, is this not the most magical color in the entire world? It's like truly gold. Like, look at compared to these yellow flowers. It's like amazing. Now I'm going to turn the heat up on that pillowcase and get that scouring process done. Okay, so it's the next day now, and the cotton has been sitting with the heat off overnight. It's ready to be rinsed out, and then it's going to be time to dye it. But first, let me show you the yarn. Look at the color we got. Is it not amazing? So you can see the water is still very much pigmented, and that's because there's lots of dye to go around. So what we're going to do with this water, after we rinse out the yarn and the water is left on its own, we're going to actually add it to the dye pot and heat it up with the cotton so that the dye is heating up and the fabric is heating up. And that's going to allow for better absorption, better adherence. So I'll show you that when it's time, but first, let me get to washing this. I'm just gonna squeeze any excess that I can back into this container so that we can reuse it to dye the cotton. And a tip, if you're ever squeezing yarn, if it's wool, don't wring it out, just squeeze. Look at that color. Ooh, it's so pretty. And now my hands smell like French onion soup. Okay, and you want to keep rinsing your yarn until the water runs clear. That's pretty much the point at which we're at right now. There is another step that I take with wool yarn, and I'll show you that next. For that, you need a bowl or a pot, something to hold water, and then fill your pot up with tepid water. So not hot, not cold, just a neutral water. And this is the point where that optional wool wash comes into play. I like to add a little bit, about a cap full of wool wash. This has lanolin in it, so it softens the yarn up. In the dyeing process, yarn can become a little bit rougher than it was prior to being dyed. So I like to add about a capful of this wool wash to that whole pot of water and just mush it all together. This is a no rinse wool wash, so even though it does make bubbles, you don't need to rinse it out. And then I like to sit the wool in there for just a few minutes, maybe 15 minutes. That will allow any of that remaining onion water to leach out. It leaves a lovely eucalyptus scent on the yarn, and it helps to soften up the yarn. If you don't have wool wash, something you can use as an alternative is a little bit of hair conditioner, and let it sit in there for a minute. It'll soften your yarn back up, and it'll also just help to leach out any of that pigment that's still wash-outable, not adhered to the yarn. Now that that's done, what I'm going to do next is rinse out that pillowcase to get all of the washing soda out of the fabric. And there we go. Now that pillowcase is ready to be dyed. It now has been pre-mordanted with washing soda, and it was scoured with soapy water to begin with. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to take that pot that was previously used for mordanting and scouring, I'm going to put it back on the burner on high just to bring it up to temperature, and then I'm going to add the remainder of that dye water. And then I'm going to add my pillowcase. So we're going to sit that in that dye bath until it comes up to a simmer. We'll back the heat down to low, probably for at least an hour. I think I'll probably go 2 hours on it just to get everything we can out of that dye. And then after that, we're going to turn the heat off and leave it all day. So now that that part's done, let's go back to the wool. So it's been about 15 minutes. This wool is now ready to come out of that wool wash bath. And I'm just going to squeeze out any of the remaining water. The wool wash bath water here is a little yellow, so there was still some liquid to remove. Then I'm just going to rinse it out one more time. You don't have to with this wool wash, but I just like to make sure. And voila! Now it's time to hang it to dry. Let me show you how I do that next. I like to hang my yarn in a shady tree, and I let it dry all day in the sun. I don't know, it feels like it adds a little something extra. So I just find a branch strong enough to hold the yarn, and I'll just hang it like that. And I'll let it hang for the whole day. It'll dry out, it'll get that fresh laundry smell from being outside, and then it's gonna be done. It's really bright out right now, I'm not gonna lie. But I'm gonna show you when it's finished. I'll give you some close-up shots of it now while it's wet. It'll lighten a little bit. Ooh, a ladybug. It'll lighten a little bit as it dries out, but it's beautiful, it really is. So, come have a look. Okay, friends, so you remember at the beginning of this endeavor, we had this beautiful, creamy white, woolly merino wool. Are you ready to see what the onion skins did? I know you saw a little bit of it already, but here's like the final color. Look at this, is that not just insanity? Wow, this color is beautiful. It came out really nice, but we're not finished yet. I will be showing you close-ups of this and giving a little bit more follow-up information. But first, we have to finish with that pillowcase. So now that the yarn is dry, it's time to rinse out that pillowcase. And if you remember, I talked about color modification and mordanting with iron over alum. Well, with cotton, you can color modify with that iron water just as easily. So what I'm going to show you is the difference that a little bit of iron in the colored water can make. We're gonna pull out the pillowcase, we're gonna rinse it out of all the colored liquid that's left from the onion skins, and then we're going to add just a little bit of iron water to one side of the pillowcase so you can see right before your very eyes how drastic the color change is gonna be. So let me rinse out the pillowcase, I'll let you watch me do that, and then I'll bring you in for a little bit of a closer fun part for the color modification. Holy moly, look at that. Is that not amazing?